No one in that bar knew what they were about to witness. Not the bartender polishing a glass behind the counter. Not the bikers laughing loudly near the door. And certainly not the man who was about to throw the first punch. To them, it looked simple. An older man. Calm. Quiet. Standing alone. And a biker who believed fear was something you could force out of people with size, noise, and arrogance. They didn't know that the man they were looking at was Chuck Norris. The bar was alive with sound, engines rumbling outside, boots scraping against the floor, music humming low in the background. It was the kind of place where confidence mattered more than manners, where intimidation passed for strength. Nobody was paying attention to Chuck, and that's exactly how he liked it. Chuck stood relaxed, hands loose at his sides, posture easy. No tension. No sign of danger. If anything, he looked like someone enjoying a quiet moment in a loud world. That calmness caught the wrong kind of attention. One of the bikers noticed him and smirked. To him, Chuck didn't look intimidating. He looked old, slow, harmless. The kind of man who wouldn't push back. The biker said something under his breath. A joke. An insult. Loud enough for others to hear. A few laughs followed. Chuck didn't react. That silence was misunderstood. The biker stepped closer, chest out, shoulders wide. He wanted a response. He wanted eyes on him. In places like this, respect was taken, not given. Still, Chuck remained calm. That was the moment the room unknowingly held its breath. Because there's a kind of quiet that doesn't come from fear. It comes from control. The biker mistook that control for weakness. He raised his voice. Another insult. Sharper. More aggressive. The laughter faded. A few people turned fully now, sensing something shift in the air. The bartender stopped moving. Conversations dropped into murmurs. Chuck slowly turned his head. No anger crossed his face. No tension entered his body. Just focus. For a split second, something flickered in the biker's mind. Doubt, maybe. A warning he didn't understand. But pride drowned it out. He stepped into Chuck's space. Too close. This wasn't a movie scene. There was no dramatic music, no slow motion. Just a decision being made in real time. The biker cocked his fist. And in that moment, before the punch was thrown, everything changed. Because Chuck Norris wasn't preparing to fight. He was preparing to end it. The crowd didn't know it yet, but they were seconds away from witnessing something rare. Not rage. Not chaos. Not brutality. They were about to witness discipline. Precision. And a level of martial arts mastery that turns violence into a lesson. And once that lesson was taught, no one in that bar would ever forget it. The bar felt alive in a way only biker stops ever do. Engines had just gone silent outside, but their presence still lingered in the air. Hot metal, fuel, leather, and dust. Inside, the noise took over. Glasses clinked against the counter. Boots thudded across the wooden floor. Laughter came in rough bursts, loud and careless, echoing off the walls like it always did. This place wasn't built for subtlety. It was built for presence. Chuck Norris stood near the counter, unnoticed by most. He wasn't dressed to stand out. No flashy clothes, no symbols of status, no signs of who he really was. To the people around him, he looked like just another man passing through. Quiet. Reserved. Older than most in the room. And that was exactly the illusion. Chuck had spent his life in places like this. Not bars, but moments. Moments where people tested boundaries. Moments where ego tried to overpower discipline. Moments where chaos waited for a single spark. He didn't crave attention. He avoided it. Years of training had taught him that the most dangerous position wasn't the center of the room, it was being overlooked. Around him, the bikers filled the space with confidence. Leather jackets creaked as they moved. Tattoos wrapped around arms hardened by the road. Their voices carried authority, not because they were loud, but because no one challenged them. They owned the room. Or so they believed. Chuck observed quietly. He noticed how they stood, how they laughed, how their attention drifted toward anyone who looked different. He saw the subtle shifts in posture, the way eyes lingered too long, the way space was claimed without permission. To everyone else, it was just noise. To Chuck, it was information. He rested his hand lightly on the counter, breathing slow, steady. There was no tension in his shoulders, no tightness in his jaw. He wasn't preparing for anything. He was simply present. That presence, calm, grounded, unbothered, was rare in a place fueled by dominance. A bartender slid a drink across the counter. Chuck nodded in thanks. No words needed. Time passed. Minutes that felt ordinary. Safe. And that's how confrontations usually begin, not with violence, but with comfort. With the belief that nothing will happen. With people letting their guard down because everything feels familiar. The bikers laughed louder now. One of them told a story, exaggerating every detail. The group roared in approval. Their confidence fed on itself. Chuck didn't look their way. That, more than anything, planted the seed. In environments like this, silence can be seen as a challenge. Calm can be mistaken for fear. And respect is often confused with submission. The biker who would soon make the mistake glanced at Chuck again. Then again. He didn't know why the quiet man bothered him, but it did. There was no reaction to feed on. No acknowledgement. No validation. Just stillness. Chuck remained where he was, unaware of nothing, yet acting like nothing mattered. He wasn't waiting for trouble. But he wasn't blind to it either. This was the calm before the storm, the kind that feels peaceful right until it's gone. And somewhere in that noisy room, a decision was forming. A choice driven by ego, impatience, and the need to prove dominance. The night was about to stop being ordinary. Because when calm meets arrogance, only one of them survives the moment intact. It started with a look. Not a long one. Not even an obvious one. Just a quick glance from across the room that lingered a second too long. The kind of look that isn't about curiosity, but about judgment. One of the bikers leaned back against the bar, drink in hand, eyes drifting lazily over the room. His laughter faded as his gaze landed on Chuck Norris. The quiet man. The one who hadn't reacted to anything all night. The biker narrowed his eyes. To him, Chuck didn't fit. He wasn't loud. He wasn't showing off. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. In a place where dominance ruled, that kind of calm felt like defiance. The biker smirked and leaned toward his friends. He said something low at first, just enough for them to hear. A joke. A careless remark. A dig meant to get a reaction. A few of them chuckled. Chuck heard it. He didn't turn. He didn't respond. He didn't even change his posture. That lack of reaction hit harder than words ever could. Encouraged, the biker raised his voice. This time, the comment was clearer. Sharper. Designed to cut. A couple of heads turned. Someone near the jukebox frowned. The bartender glanced up, sensing a shift. Chuck took a slow breath. Not because he was nervous. Because he was aware. He turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the sound, and met the biker's eyes. The look was calm. Steady. Almost curious. No anger. No challenge. Just presence. For a brief moment, something passed between them. The biker felt it. A hesitation. A warning he couldn't explain. But pride doesn't listen to warnings. He straightened up and stepped away from his friends, boots heavy against the floor. Each step was deliberate, meant to be seen. The bar's noise softened as attention drifted toward the movement. Got a problem? The biker said loudly, though his words weren't really a question. Chuck didn't answer right away. He turned fully now, facing the biker. Up close, the difference between them was clear. The biker was bigger, younger, louder. Everything on the surface said he had the advantage. Appearances, however, tell lies. Chuck's expression didn't change. He didn't size the man up. He didn't puff his chest. He didn't step back either. I don't, Chuck said calmly. But you're getting close to making one. The words weren't threatening. They didn't need to be. A ripple moved through the crowd. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned in, sensing confrontation. A few phones were discreetly raised, though no one knew why yet. The biker laughed. Not because it was funny, but because laughter was his shield. "Relax," he said. "We're just talking." But his tone betrayed him. This wasn't conversation. It was provocation. He took another step closer, invading Chuck's space. Close enough to smell the alcohol on his breath. Close enough to force a reaction. Chuck didn't move. That stillness frustrated the biker. He wanted anger, fear, something to feed his ego. Instead, he got silence. "Say something," the biker snapped. Chuck's eyes never left his. "You should step back," he said quietly. The words landed like a challenge. For a second, the biker considered it. You could see the thought flicker behind his eyes. Something about the man in front of him didn't add up. The calm, the balance, the way he stood so naturally in a hostile space. But backing down wasn't an option. Not here. Not in front of his friends. The biker scoffed and turned slightly, as if to show the room he wasn't intimidated. "This guy thinks he can tell me what to do," he announced. No one laughed. The silence that followed was heavier than noise. Chuck remained where he was, centered, breathing steady. He hadn't come looking for trouble, but now it was standing right in front of him. And the biker, driven by pride and fueled by alcohol, made the mistake that turns tension into violence. He clenched his fist. That single motion shifted everything. The air felt tight. The room seemed smaller. Time slowed, not for the crowd, but for the two men facing each other. Because once disrespect becomes action, there is no going back. And in that moment, the biker believed he was about to assert dominance. What he didn't know was that he had just stepped into a lesson, taught by decades of discipline, control, and deadly martial arts precision. The point of no return had been reached. For a brief moment, everything slowed. The noise of the bar faded into the background, as if someone had turned the volume down on the world. Chuck Norris stood there, facing the biker, aware of every detail, the clenched fist, the shallow breathing, the tension rolling off the man like heat. Chuck had seen this moment countless times before. Not in bars, not with bikers, but in dojos, competitions, real confrontations where ego pushed people past the point of reason. This moment always came right before things went wrong. Right before someone made a choice they couldn't undo. Inside Chuck's mind, there was no panic. Only calculation. He knew exactly how fast this could end. He knew where to strike, how to move, how to neutralize the threat in less than a second. His body remembered what to do without needing thought. Decades of training had carved those responses into muscle and bone. But that wasn't the real fight. The real fight was restraint. Chuck didn't want to hurt anyone. He never did. He had spent his life learning that martial arts weren't about dominance. They were about control. Control over the body. Control over fear. Control over ego. And right now, the biker had none of it. Chuck glanced around the room, not in fear, but awareness. He saw the bartender gripping the counter. A couple near the door shifting uneasily. A man halfway through raising his phone, unsure if he should keep recording or put it away. Innocent people. Bystanders. This wasn't just about him anymore. Chuck took a slow breath, grounding himself. He relaxed his shoulders even more, loosening his stance instead of tightening it. To the untrained eye, it looked like surrender. It wasn't. It was readiness without aggression. "Listen," Chuck said calmly, his voice low but clear. "You don't want to do this." The biker scoffed. "You gonna lecture me now?" Chuck shook his head slightly. "I'm giving you a way out." That confused the biker. People like him weren't used to that. Confrontations were supposed to escalate, not de-escalate. He expected insults, fear, threats, not an invitation to step back with dignity intact. That made him angrier. He leaned forward, face inches from Chuck's. "You think you scare me?" Chuck met his stare without blinking. "No," he said. "I think you're scared already." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Something snapped behind the biker's eyes. The room felt tighter now. Every instinct in Chuck told him the window was closing. The biker's breathing grew heavier. His knuckles whitened around his fist. Chuck shifted his feet subtly, aligning his balance. He positioned himself so the biker's back was angled away from the crowd. If this went bad, he wanted space, room to move without others getting hurt. This was discipline in action. One step at a time. Chuck had one last chance to stop it. "Walk away," he said. "Right now." For a split second, the biker hesitated. And in that hesitation, Chuck saw it clearly, the internal battle. Pride versus instinct. Ego versus survival. The biker's instinct was screaming at him. Something was wrong. Something about this man didn't feel normal. Didn't feel safe. But his pride was louder. Laughter from behind him, one of his friends, uneasy but trying to play it off, pushed him over the edge. "You gonna let him talk to you like that?" someone muttered. That was all it took. The biker snarled, "You don't tell me what to do." Chuck exhaled slowly. That was the answer. In that moment, Chuck accepted what was coming, not with excitement, not with anger, but with clarity. He had done everything he could. He had given warnings. He had offered exits. Now his responsibility was simple. End it quickly. End it safely. End it without unnecessary harm. Chuck's hands relaxed even further, fingers loose, ready. His eyes softened, not from mercy, but from focus. He tuned out the room completely now. There was only the man in front of him and the space between them. The biker shifted his weight forward. That movement told Chuck everything. This wasn't posturing anymore. This was action. The crowd sensed it too. Someone gasped. A chair scraped against the floor as someone stepped back. Time stretched thin. Chuck didn't move first. He never needed to. Because true martial artists don't rush toward violence. They let violence expose itself. And as the biker's shoulder rolled forward, fist beginning its wild arc, Chuck made his final decision. Not to fight, but to teach. A lesson about control. About discipline. About what happens when aggression collides with mastery. The moment of restraint was over. And the moment of truth was about to begin. The punch came fast, but not clean. It was driven by anger, alcohol, and ego. A wide, looping swing meant to intimidate as much as injure. The biker committed his weight to it, believing force alone would decide the outcome. That belief was his mistake. Chuck Norris saw the punch before it fully formed. Not because he was faster than humanly possible, but because he understood movement. The tension in the biker's shoulders, the shift in his hips, the tightening of his jaw, those signals spoke louder than the fist itself. As the punch cut through the air, Chuck moved. Not back. Not away. He stepped in. It was a subtle shift, barely noticeable to anyone watching, but it changed everything. The biker's fist passed where Chuck's head had been a moment earlier, slicing through empty space. Momentum carried the biker forward, off balance. Chuck's left hand guided the biker's wrist, redirecting the force instead of meeting it. His right forearm pressed into the elbow joint at just the right angle, not to break it, but to lock it. Pain flashed across the biker's face. Confusion followed. Before he could react, Chuck rotated his body, using the biker's own momentum against him. The room erupted in gasps. Someone shouted. A glass shattered somewhere near the bar. To the crowd, it looked like the biker had tripped. To anyone trained, it was a masterclass in control. The biker stumbled, barely keeping his feet. His pride screamed at him to swing again, harder this time. He wrenched his arm back and lunged forward, throwing another punch, sloppier, fueled by frustration. Chuck stayed calm. He slipped to the outside of the strike, footwork smooth and economical. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary speed. Every step had purpose. He placed his palm against the biker's chest, not a strike, just a touch, and stepped past him. The biker didn't understand what had happened until his feet left the floor. He crashed into a nearby table, bottles rattling, chairs scraping loudly against the wood. The room exploded with noise now, shouts, curses, scrambling footsteps. But Chuck didn't follow. He stayed where he was, centered, watching. The biker pushed himself up, face flushed with embarrassment and rage. His friends shouted encouragement, though none of them moved to help. This wasn't their fight anymore. "You think you're tough?" the biker snarled, spitting on the floor. Chuck didn't answer. That silence enraged him more than any insult could have. The biker charged again. This time, he went for a tackle, arms wide, hoping brute strength would overwhelm technique. It was a desperate move, the kind people make when plans fall apart. Chuck sidestepped at the last second and dropped his weight low. He hooked the biker's leg and guided him down, not violently, but decisively. The biker hit the floor hard. The sound echoed through the bar. Before the biker could scramble back up, Chuck was already there. One knee planted beside the biker's ribs, his weight controlled, precise. He secured the biker's arm and applied pressure at the shoulder and wrist simultaneously. The biker gasped. He tried to move. He couldn't. The pain wasn't explosive. It was sharp, contained, undeniable. The kind that tells your body resistance is pointless. "Stop," Chuck said calmly. Not loudly. Not angrily. The biker struggled again, instinct screaming at him to fight. Chuck increased the pressure slightly, just enough. The biker cried out. Silence fell over the room. Everyone was watching now. Phones were fully raised. No one was laughing. No one was cheering. The mood had shifted from entertainment to reality. This wasn't a brawl. This was control. Chuck leaned in slightly, his voice low and steady. "You're done." The biker's breathing was heavy, panicked. He nodded once. Then twice. Chuck released the hold immediately and stood up, stepping back to give space. He didn't gloat. He didn't posture. He didn't even look at the crowd. He simply adjusted his stance and waited. The biker rolled onto his side, clutching his arm, staring up at Chuck with disbelief. The fight he thought he wanted had vanished, replaced by something worse, humiliation. Chuck met his gaze one last time. "This didn't have to happen," he said. Security rushed in then, finally breaking the tension. The biker's friends pulled him away, avoiding Chuck's eyes. The room buzzed with hushed voices. Everyone had just seen something rare. Not violence for spectacle, but confrontation ended by mastery. And as Chuck stepped back toward the counter, calm returning to the space he occupied, one truth settled over the bar like a heavy fog. Raw aggression had met discipline. And discipline had won without excess. But the impact of what happened was far from over. The bar remained silent long after the biker was pulled away. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from shock alone. It was the kind that forces reflection. People stood frozen, unsure whether to speak, move, or look away. The air felt heavier now, charged with the aftermath of something they didn't fully understand. Chuck Norris stood near the center of it all, breathing steady, posture relaxed. To anyone expecting anger, there was none. No clenched jaw. No shaking hands. No rush of adrenaline on display. If anything, he looked exactly the same as he had before the first insult was ever spoken. That was the most unsettling part. The biker, now on his feet with help from his friends, kept glancing back. The arrogance that had fueled him earlier was gone. In its place sat confusion and a quiet fear he couldn't hide. He had thrown everything he had. And it hadn't mattered. Chuck didn't approach him. He didn't threaten him. He didn't even look his way again. His authority came from absence, not dominance. From the fact that he had proven everything he needed to prove. Security stood between them now, uncertain who to address. The bartender finally exhaled, hands shaking slightly as he set a glass down. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Who is that guy?" Another voice answered quietly, "You don't know." Word traveled fast after that. Heads tilted. Eyes widened. A few people recognized the name, the face, the reputation. Chuck Norris, the man whose life had been built on discipline, not showmanship. The biker heard it too. His shoulders slumped as realization sank in. This hadn't been a lucky moment. This hadn't been a fluke. He hadn't lost to chance. He had lost to mastery. Chuck stepped back toward the counter, reclaiming the space he'd never really left. The bartender slid his drink back in front of him, hands respectful now, movements careful. "No trouble here anymore," Chuck said calmly. It wasn't a command. It was a statement. The room slowly came back to life, though something had changed. Voices stayed lower. Laughter felt cautious. People kept glancing toward Chuck, as if trying to understand what they had just witnessed. They hadn't seen a fight. They had seen restraint. That was the climax. Not the takedown, not the lock, not the moment the biker hit the floor, but what came after. The calm authority of someone who didn't need validation. Someone who had nothing left to prove. Chuck took a sip of his drink and looked around, eyes scanning not for threats, but for calm. He was already thinking about leaving. Staying wasn't important anymore. The lesson had been delivered. As he turned to walk away, the biker's voice broke the quiet. "Hey." Chuck stopped but didn't turn. The biker swallowed hard. I didn't know." Chuck glanced back then, not with anger, but understanding. "Now you do," he said. That was it. No lecture. No warning. No victory speech. Just clarity. Security escorted the biker out, his friends silent as they followed. The door closed behind them, and with it, the tension drained from the room. People exhaled collectively. Someone near the door whispered, "He could have really hurt him." Another replied, "Yeah, but he didn't." That realization lingered. Chuck Norris finished his drink, nodded to the bartender, and headed for the exit. As he walked past the crowd, people stepped aside, not out of fear, but respect. They had witnessed something rare. A man who carried immense power, and chose restraint. That was the authority moment. Not domination, not intimidation, but control so complete it reshaped the room. Outside, the engines roared again as bikes fired up and rolled away, but the sound felt different now. Quieter. Smaller. Inside the bar, the story had already begun to grow. And by the time the night was over, one thing was certain. Everyone there would remember the moment they saw real martial arts power. Not in how it struck, but in how it stopped. Because the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one who throws the punch. It's the one who never has to. By the time Chuck Norris stepped out into the cool night air, the moment inside the bar had already begun to transform. What had happened was no longer just an incident. It was becoming a story. Inside, people slowly returned to their drinks, but the energy was different. Conversations restarted in lower tones. Laughter sounded hesitant, as if no one wanted to be the loudest voice in the room anymore. Every few seconds, someone glanced toward the door Chuck had just walked through, replaying the scene in their mind. They weren't replaying the punch. They were replaying the restraint. Someone at the bar leaned over to his friend and whispered, "Did you see how calm he was?" Another replied, "Yeah, like he already knew the outcome." Phones were out now, not recording, but sharing. Messages were being typed, stories told in real time. The details shifted slightly with every retelling, but the core never changed. A biker had thrown a punch at Chuck Norris, and it ended before it truly began. Outside, Chuck paused for a moment before heading to his vehicle. He took a slow breath, letting the night settle his thoughts. There was no rush in his movements. No adrenaline crash. No shaking hands. This wasn't unusual for him. He had spent a lifetime learning that violence leaves a mark, not just on bodies, but on everyone who witnesses it. That's why control mattered more than victory. Inside the bar, the biker and his friends were gone, but their absence spoke loudly. The space they once filled felt smaller now, less aggressive. As if the room itself had learned something. A few patrons debated quietly. He could have broken his arm. But he didn't. That's the scary part. Scary, not because of danger, but because of what discipline looks like when it's real. By the next morning, the story had traveled far beyond that bar. A short clip surfaced online. Shaky. Grainy. Incomplete. But enough. People shared it not for the impact, but for the precision. For the calmness. For the moment when violence was neutralized without turning into chaos. Comments flooded in. Age doesn't matter. That's real martial arts. Control beats strength every time. The clip didn't go viral because someone got hurt. It went viral because someone didn't. People saw something rare in a world addicted to spectacle. They saw power that didn't need to announce itself. Strength that didn't chase applause. Chuck Norris never commented on it. He didn't need to. He had always believed that lessons land harder when they aren't explained. The biker, on the other hand, would never forget that night. Not because of the pain, but because of the realization. He had walked in believing intimidation was power. He walked out knowing it wasn't. And that lesson would stay with him longer than any bruise. The bar would return to normal eventually. Music would get loud again. Laughter would fill the space. New faces would take old seats. But the people who were there that night would always remember. They had seen the difference between aggression and authority, between noise and confidence, between ego and mastery. And in quiet moments, they'd think back to the man who stood his ground without raising his voice, who ended a fight by refusing to let it become one. That's the real legacy of martial arts. Not domination. Not destruction. Discipline. Because true strength isn't proven by how hard you can hit. It's proven by how much damage you can prevent. And that night, in an ordinary bar, Chuck Norris reminded everyone of something the world often forgets. The strongest person in the room is not the loudest. It's the one who walks away with control intact.